everyone. Welcome back to the ASPA podcast. My name is Lily Koash Johnson, and I am the marketing intern for ASPA. Today, I'm joined by Dale Fisher. On his leadership journey, he has built a very unique set of skills in human capital leadership that spans 26 years in public education, including serving as a middle school science teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, and the executive director. Dale actively serves the executive board for ASPA and is highly involved in IASPA, which is our Illinois state affiliate. He has presented many times at our annual conference. Welcome, Dale.
Hello.
Amazing. So I think we should just hop into some questions. So we're going to be talking about AI today. Is that correct, Dale?
That is correct.
Perfect. Can you provide an overview on how artificial intelligence is currently being integrated into human resources within K-12 education?
Yeah, I'd love to. So AI, artificial intelligence, is increasingly becoming quite a valuable tool in the HR circles, especially in K-12 education. I see it as something that's going to help streamline processes, hopefully improve some decision making, probably enhance overall efficiency. I shouldn't say probably, at a minimum, it should enhance efficiency. And I've got some key ideas if you want me to share. I made some notes on this when we talked about this topic to be able to elaborate a little more, and if that's okay with you.
I would love to have you share.
All
Yes.
right. Let's run right into it then. So the first one is an easy one for me, is like the home run hit, recruiting and hiring. So you're talking about like what this can do to help with candidate screening, looking at some AI powered tools there, analyze resumes, applications, interview scheduling. It can automate the scheduling interviews, making sure that available times are all hit, reducing that administrative burden. And then this is a big one, predictive analytics. So I see AI being used to predict which candidates are most likely to succeed down the road and then ultimately stay in their positions based off of responses to interviews and applications and screeners, helping schools make more informed decisions. Another big category would be like onboarding, where you automate the onboarding processes and hopefully bring in ideas like personalized training that is more individualized based off of candidate responses and applications. Third category would be something along the lines of like employee engagement and retention. More to come in that later. I know we have another question that's going to bring that up. And also something that I have presented on in stay interviews and things like that. So we'll get to that down the road. Performance management, looking at this through the lens of evaluations, goal setting and tracking, all that AI can assist with. And then finally, like administrative efficiency, like how can we automate routine tasks? Think of things like payroll processing to an extent, benefits administration, compliance reporting. That's a huge one where I'm located in Illinois. And then something people may not have heard about, like predictive maintenance, predict when certain resources or systems might need updates and give me info on that. Your HR tracking tools, those all require a bit of annual maintenance to make sure that you're on top of those things. So I say those 5 categories, all rooted in the idea of getting past what most educators initially see when they look at artificial intelligence, like just throw out the main culprit, Chat GPT. We get that like deep-seated anxiety of, oh, it's cheating, or you're asking it a question, it's giving you a computer's response. Like that is basic surface level stuff when it comes to AI that I would encourage anyone in education to learn how to master that because it opens up all the other doors. But please don't get locked into that that's all AI is using Chat GPT or an equivalent to ask a question and getting a spit out answer. So that would be my answer to the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of dove into that in the beginning, but how do you see AI tools transforming the recruitment and hiring process for teachers and staff in schools?
Well, secretly, I use AI for some of this now to make my life a little bit easier, especially that I've been doing this job for close to 15 years. Things like job postings, putting up automated job descriptions. I have for a number of years now been teaching a admin academy in Illinois. We're required to take professional development each year. And one of the academies that we are looking at is how to craft job descriptions. Well, the first thing I tell people is if you're writing job descriptions from scratch, you're wasting your time because you could do any Google search and find all of the essential duties and job responsibilities for job descriptions that have been in place for days, months, weeks, years. You pick it. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to writing those things. You need to be able to tweak it to suit your system. And so the algorithms that are in place for artificial intelligence can pull all that data out and essentially make your life significantly easier because you don't need to reinvent all of it. Same goes for application screening. Think of things like resume parsing, where you're actually diving through resumes and applications and looking for relevant information, key things that you want to be able to pull off for candidates, indicators that that's the right person, right fit for the job. Initial filtering would fall under the application screening. AI algorithms filter out applicants who may not meet your basic requirements. So if you need a certain certification, like don't waste your time searching for it. Have the AI system search the resumes for it and find out if it's there. Simple candidate assessments. This goes for what it is. I mean, a lot of systems are already using screeners that would fall in line with candidate assessments, and those are somewhat AI powered. The algorithms are determining if answers are right or wrong. But that leads to personality and culture fit because you have to define what you want your culture to be, and you can use AI to match a candidate against the culture to see if they're a fit for the system. And we talked a little bit about this interview processing. So you're talking about scheduling your interviews or using virtual interviews and coordinating all those things to facilitate those interviews. I just learned about something a couple of weeks ago using natural language processing to transcribe interviews if you need to get outside your comfort zone with where you're currently at. And then finally in this category, I put in onboarding. So how can we automate the onboarding process? That doesn't mean mentoring or, coaching. Onboarding is like going through the minutia that it requires to be a part of the system and making sure that those I's are dotted and those T's are crossed. So, and then you could also dabble in things like continuous improvement, where you're looking at feedback analysis loops or performance monitoring. I mean, I think that's going to be a little bit more down the road, but there's no reason that the algorithms that exist for artificial intelligence couldn't track some of those things for you to take the burden off of the administrative tasks, in my opinion.
So why don't we dive in a little bit into the performance evaluation? In what ways might AI be used to enhance the evaluation of teachers and performance in professional development?
That's a great question, Lily, because in this one, people are either going to turn this podcast off and say Dale's lost his mind, or say, do tell, because this is a real time suck for administrators in both a good way and a bad way. It occupies a lot of our time. So some of the areas that I think that AI has real potential to enhance the teacher performance and PD piece is looking at like more data-driven, objective, and personalized insights that you can get to help with that evaluation piece. So let's look at like data-driven performance evaluation. So you can automate the data collection process, collecting and analyzing data from various sources. You can upload student performance metrics, classroom observation data, and feedback to see if there's any trends that exist in that data. And believe it or not, I have used it for that, and it's amazing how it can help draw ideas or concepts out of big data dumps to say, here's some trends that are spotted. Real-time feedback, you can look at classroom analytics, look at classroom data as it's coming in, student engagement levels, participation rates. If you're able to load that data in, it can give you real feedback based off of it and in a near live setting. And this one I haven't dabbled in, but I know people who have touched on it, voice and video analysis, looking at recordings of classroom sessions to evaluate factors such as clarity, pace, student engagement level. Is there constructive criticism or feedback going for improvement, things like that. And then let's look at personalized PD, so you can get to individualized learning plans. I believe that AI can ultimately look at recommending professional development plans for teachers based off of their needs, strengths, and areas for improvement. But that's all based on how honest someone wants to be about where their needs are and make sure that that's available for the algorithm to crunch. And then along those lines, looking at adaptive learning, looking at what those experiences are for teachers, possibly adjusting content pace based on progress and feedback, those would fall into it. And I'll keep saying this, like, what can we do to reduce the administrative burden? I really jumped on board with how we can utilize AI because for whatever success we may have in my district currently, based off of how big the system is, I'm still one administrator and a small office of an HR specialist and HR generalist. So we're always trying to maximize our admin time we commit to projects. So automating reports would fall under reducing administrative burden, streamlining processes, automated reports. Let's talk about that for a second. How can we automate the generation of performance evaluation reports, saving time for administrators, compliance reports we have to put out, Illinois getting information back to the Illinois State Board of Education based off of their data requests. That can help reduce it. And don't think like there's some mythical person in a ivory tower that is doing all the work. You're still doing the work. You're just using artificial intelligence to help you reduce the amount of time you have to commit to it. And I think that's one of the things that freaks people out is, well, if they're just going to replace my job and it's going to become the matrix, like, calm down. It's not going to be to that extent for quite some time before the Terminators show up with Skynet. We're talking about ways to just using a system to crunch data for you easier. And I'll go back to my childhood on this, where our teachers used to tell us you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket. And the reality is 20 years later, that's exactly what I have. I walk around with one of the most powerful computers in my pocket, giving me information all the time. So as new technology comes out, we tend to be resistant to the idea of using that technology. But artificial intelligence, to me, is the future of K-12 HR, and it's going to make your life easier if you embrace it.
Yeah, using it as a tool instead of something that will replace you is super important. So let's
Exactly.
talk a little bit about administrative efficiency. How could AI help streamline the administrative tasks such as scheduling, payroll, and compliancy with regulations?
You're just feeding off the questions because that just comes right. We're alluding to it in the previous questions, so let's dive headfirst into this.
Absolutely. Let's
So this
dive.
is
Let's do
all
it.
contingent on like how you actually operate as a system. So there's things that I know my HR team does that other HR people don't do. So substitute whatever your job description is for your role in your system. But for us, just some ideas. Things like scheduling. You could use automated timetabling where it can look at helping schedule for classes, exams, meetings. What are the variables that have to come into play? We actually worked with a middle school on how to tweak the schedule in place because the classes were lopsided. So we actually plugged some data into our AI systems, and it was able to put out like this is the ideal way to schedule these classes so that you can maximize who has what certifications. It actually helped our scheduling burden instead of immediately jumping to, well, we got to hire more staff. Like, well, let's look at what our brain did to make the schedule versus what that would look like if we plugged it into an AI tool. Substitute teacher management, guest teacher management, identify and contact available subs. Those systems exist. So things like frontline absence management, red rower absence tracking, those are software services, but essentially you're putting data in and it's spitting out the best way to do it. So again, don't reinvent the wheel and create your own sub-tracking system, but this is just a reminder that you're already using software to help ease the administrative burden. Get that mindset correct on how it can actually help you. Another category outside of scheduling is payroll. It can handle complex payroll calculations, deductions, overtime bonuses, tax withholdings. It's probably going to be more accurate and will get you to more timely payments if that's what's required, especially if you're a small system. but that would help you. Anomaly detection, is there something weird? Plug your data in and say, does something seem out of place here? This would help maybe identify unusual overtime claims or discrepancy in working hours. Instead of that error getting pushed through and you having to claw back money from an employee, which is never good. Catch it before it gets to that point. And this ultimately reduces the risk of fraud and errors that would come into place. And then we all know this one, compliance with tax regulations. Like if you're not looking and using software technology, artificial intelligence, stay on top of what the latest tax laws are and what the implications of that, that's something you should definitely jump into. And we alluded to this often, compliance with regulations. In my department, we oversee Board of Ed policy for the district. We're obviously not the Board of Ed, but it's my job to monitor changes to policy that are being recommended. And you can use AI to stay on top of comparisons between documents to say, this is our current policy, this is the update, what is the difference between the two? That goes in line with document management, making sure that the organization of those documents is in place. And then looking at things like reporting, because if your state is like mine, where we are required to update the Illinois Board of Education on new data pieces that are required monthly, this will help get to that point. And then simple things that you're going to take for granted, like general administrative tasks, attendance taking, inventory management, communications. Sometimes the best way to start off a difficult email is to plug in what you want to say into AI and give you a template and then tweak that language that suits more of your voice and work it from there. Did you have a question on that?
No, 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 no. Continue, continue.
And then ultimately the benefits of AI and administrative tasks. So just quickly here, think efficiency, accuracy, cost savings. My time costs money, and if I could use an algorithm to help crank out some material, that makes us more efficient. Scalability. You start off small, we got to go something big, using AI to be predictive of what the scale is going to take for something like that. And ultimately enhance decision making. Using data, analyzing data gives me the best informed decision that I can make. You're not going to trust that AI is always right, but if it can help crunch the data for you so that you can make the best decision on that, that's how you should envision artificial intelligence through a data decision making lens.
Yeah,
Did that
absolutely.
answer the question? That was a lot.
No, yeah, you absolutely did. You knocked the nail right on the head. So
Okay.
you mentioned a lot at the beginning of the podcast how a lot of people are concerned about AI, like, replacing them and stuff, and like, feeling like it's cheating. So what are some ethical considerations that should be taken into account when implementing AI into HR, particularly in the educational setting?
That's a great question because I still have these concerns. So on one hand, over here, I'm putting my hand, I'm advocating for AI, and at the same time, I'm terrified of AI. But this hand is weighing heavier now, and I'm using more of it while still being considerate of those ethical considerations. So looking at this question, I made some notes on some things that concern me. First, you got to think of bias and fairness, mostly because it's an algorithm, and an algorithm is computational. Is there bias in the algorithm? And this is a legitimate thing that you have to be concerned of if it's just telling you what you want to hear. And that's why I'm saying I don't necessarily trust everything that comes out of AI. I look at what's created and say, to what extent is this something that I can use and ultimately benefit me as a K-12 HR person to make my life easier? So be careful of the algorithm bias. Transparency. How understanding how AI algorithms make decisions is key. And so don't just use it blindly. Start doing your research on how those algorithms are put in. For the most part, my understanding of something like a chat GPT is it's continually sweeping the internet. Sweeping it meaning it's out there pulling data points left and right and making decisions based off of data that exists on the internet as of this moment. You can come back in 2 weeks and it's going to give you a different response because there's new data available. So understanding the transparency piece of decisions using an algorithm are made on what exists now, that could change momentarily, daily, weekly. So that has to come into play. Privacy and data security would be the next big category for me. So from a data privacy lens, you have to be conscious of student confidentiality, staff confidentiality, making sure that if you're going to collect data, how is that data stored? How is that data processed? And what's the security that exists on that? And then also making sure that there's some informed consent here. Individuals should know about how any data that they're creating is being used, and ultimately collective, especially during the hiring process, during performance evaluations, looking at PD activities, things like that. So the two big ones already are bias and fairness, and then privacy and data security. And the third one I would hit on is accountability, making sure there's some human oversight. I alluded to this a couple times. Don't just blindly believe what's coming back out of the algorithm. You should be analyzing the data that comes back out of the algorithm even further to determine what's the validity of what I'm seeing, because what exists in the internet could ultimately change or impact because of that bias that for data that's being crunched out of it. And then making sure that there's a clear accountability piece, putting in clear lines for those AI-driven decisions. It should be clear who's responsible for the outcomes of any algorithms that's in place and how HR is using that, and ensuring that there's recourse for addressing any issues that arise. Like if someone says, if you're using AI through performance evaluation and someone doesn't necessarily like what it is that you're saying, has that been, have eyes been laid on that data by a human instead of just blindly trusting the computer? So that's where I would really fall. And you can go with regulatory compliance too, and making sure that the data that you're crunching and giving back to the oversight for us, again, I've said it multiple times, the Illinois Board of Education, that we're in compliance with expectations of how that information has been processed and not just blindly believing the algorithm.
Yeah,
Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is perfect. So, AI is still in its infancy. So what future developments do you think, do you think you can anticipate will impact the role of HR administration in K-12 education?
So you can't really use AI without thinking, how is this going to grow? How is this going to evolve? Because it's still, in my opinion, relatively new from
Oh, yeah.
when the first time I asked a silly question at this point, I think 2 years ago in Chat GPT, and to where I am now, like really not trusting, but trusting that the product is going to be as good as the data that you put into it. So that being said, there is significant room to grow and evolve here. And some of the ways I see is, we alluded to predictive analytics, but it's got to start getting to that advanced predictive analytics. I mean, looking at being very, very proactive with talent management, I anticipating staffing needs, identifying potential future leaders in your system, proactively address retention risks. Are we losing staff? Those are all things that it could help you real time if you're putting good data in. Because good data in, good data out. Bad data in, you're not going to get what you hopefully could walk away with from artificial intelligence. I'd like to see some enhanced AI recruitment tools, maybe some improved candidate matching, some AI-powered video interviews and things like that. We're scratching the surface on what that looks like. I think I haven't gotten anyone to admit it from the big companies, but things like Indeed and Monster, like those are already artificial intelligence to an extent, and matching you based off of data that's going in. Again, don't look at artificial intelligence as the matrix. Look at it as using a computer to help process it based off of accessibility to clean data. I'd also see things like adaptive learning and professional development platforms. I talked to my curriculum instruction people about this. Is there room for real-time feedback and coaching? Is there something like customized learning modules for required training so that we're not asking people to suffer through things that they've already demonstrated proficiency on? And then I'd like to see things like enhanced compliance and policy management, making sure that any policies or procedures that are required to be in place are automatically updated based off of AI with recommendations coming from whoever in your particular state is generating any policy updates. And then are we in compliance with those policies? Is something that would it be able to analyze and say, you're missing key pieces here. This needs to be updated. And then ethical and transparent AI, because this is the part that freaks people out. We can't get absorbed with, what is the legality of artificial intelligence? Look at it through an ethical lens. Like if you're transparent and you are making sure people are aware that you're using tools to help make you more efficient, we've been using a lot of those tools for decades. But for some reason, saying something like Chat GPT or Gemini or whichever one is you're using, like that immediately becomes a cheat code that you're trying to game the system. And the reality is we've been using those things for a long time. You just got to start embracing it at some point. So those are my points that I would make on where the future is for AI and K-12 education, specifically HR.
Yeah, awesome. Dale, thank you so much for sitting down with us today and kind of giving us a new insight on this thing that's going to hopefully rock up the world of HR.
No,
We'll have to see how it goes, but thank you so much for sitting down with me today. It's always great to see you.
absolutely. If you ever need anything or any of the listeners have questions on some of the things I shared, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be there to assist.
I was about to say, would you like to tell us where we can find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm not as active as I used to be, but generally Twitter is where you could find me at Dale Fisher, EDD. And then if you need to email me, dfisher, DFISHER at dps109.org, and I'll answer any questions you have and put your fears to rest.
Absolutely. Dale, always great to see you. Thank you so much.
Hope you have a great day.